Today, I'd like to talk to you about my trip down memory lane. This month, I'm celebrating 48 years of making handcrafted leather goods. And so today, I'd like to take you back to this day, February 6th, in 1977, where it all began with the $2 book. So this is my story. Back in, again, 1977, my sister and I, we were college students in Boston, and we took the subway down to downtown Boston, and Barnes and Noble bookstore had just opened in downtown Boston. So we went to check it out. And she went to the law section because that's what she was studying in school. I went to the craft section because I love to do crafts. And so I happened to along this book. And it's not a very fancy book. It's, it actually was written in 1974. It's all black and white, doesn't have any pretty color pictures or anything like that. But what it did have in the back of it, it mentioned two leather companies that were right in Boston, South Station, which was just 2 stops away from where I was right then. So the very next day, I can't find the page in here. On the very next day, I took the subway down to South Station where the shops were. And again, 2 of them were on that same street. My thing. And I went into one of the companies. Again, I wasn't sure which one. I just happened to walk into one, which was called Siegel Leather. And I bought my first piece of leather. The receipt, I can know it's this day because in here are the very first receipts from when I used to purchase leather there. And I went into this company. And again, I knew how to sew from home ec in school, which was a required course for girls back then. It was a requirement. I learned how to sew, and my sister loved to sew and so forth. I learned to sew in home ec with my sister, and so I wanted to make a vest. I went in, I told them what I wanted to do. The owner, which it happened to be, which I did not know it was the owner, of course, at the time, sold me my very first hide of leather and a few tools, a hammer. You have to punch the holes in leather by hand, so a special kind of board to do that on, a little fork punch. All my original tools, or most of them, I should say, I have. The scissors that I used then, I have replaced with a better pair. And the hammer I had then had rawhide ends, and those wore out very easily. And today I've replaced that with a hammer that's like a plastic handle, and it's lasts for decades. But in any event, it all started back then. And the very first piece I made was this leather vest that I am wearing right now. It's a little cold where I am, so I'm also wearing a sweater over it right now because it is a little chilly in the room I'm in. But this is what sparked my career. Finding this book, finding places that were right local, because again, I didn't have a car back then. I was a college student. I discovered these 2 places. I discovered the Siegel Leather, and later I discovered also on that street was a Berman Leather, which that later became my belt supplier. That's the story I'll be telling tomorrow, because tomorrow I'll be telling about how my dad influenced my belt collections and so forth, and the books that inspired my belt collections. So that will be something that's coming tomorrow. Another company that was mentioned in that book was Tandy Leather. And Tandy Leather is a company that's it's worldwide. Here in New Hampshire, where I live, there is no more Tandy Leather stores. There used to be one, or they used to actually be associated with Radio Shack, if you know what that store was from decades ago. But in any event, Tandy was where I bought a lot of my books. Sorry. So Tandy Leather was where a lot of my books came from. I didn't have it. It was in Saugus, Mass. My parents lived in Wakefield, Mass. So I would go home on this train to Wakefield, borrow my mother's car, and went to Tandy. And so Tandy was where I bought my first set of tools and so forth, and discovered the first books that helped me carve leather and so forth. So again, the ones that inspired my belt collection, I'll be telling about tomorrow. My mother inspired a lot of my bird collection. That's a story I'll be telling on February 13th. So stay tuned for that. But again, the books that inspired it were a lot of these books here about carving, because again, I like to do animals in realistic scenes. So these books had a lot of things to help with that. But unfortunately, the patterns in them were not the sizes I wanted. And you could get things called craft aids, which are these little plastic pieces. And if you put this on the leather and rub it, it will make the pattern on the leather. This is very, very tiny. This is for a belt. It is extremely tiny. So trying to use something like this when you're very new is hard to carve something very tiny. And some of the other patterns, like the original pattern this tiger comes from, is like this, way bigger than anything I wanted. So again, it took me a while to figure out the patterns. And honestly, this Al Stolman, where these books are from, I did not like his teaching style. And so I did, that wasn't effective. But I did go on to make many things with looms and so forth. This is my catalog I made in 1978. I did it as part of a independent study in college and so forth. So I made this binder, which is still my catalog to this day. It has a different name, Creative Hands of Leather Goods, because that's what I thought would be a good name for my business back then. And everybody, of course, in my family did hate it. Later on, I went on to name my business Log Cabin Leather, because in 2004, I did move into my dream house, which was my log cabin. And so my official name now is Log Cabin Leather. And yes, that is my house. And no, I am not on this beautiful pond anymore. I used to be on a pond. So I've kind of combined my, creative places that I love. And it also has a loon on it because those are my favorite. So those are some of my first pieces. My tennis bag. Again, a lot of things were made for my parents at first. Tennis bag was something I made for my father. And I do have to say, this is, I think, one of my nicest carvings of the loon itself. The background here, again, is very simple because when I was first starting out, I didn't know what I was doing. After the vest, though, before I started doing that kind of stuff, because I knew just how to sew and home ec, I actually made this jacket for my husband. And it is all hand sewn. It's lined. It's got the batting inside that and so forth, because it was made for him to wear on his motorcycle. And so that was made also as part of the independent study in 1978. Still around today. Most of the original products I made are still around. Belts and things that I made for my father, which I'll talk about again tomorrow, are still here. The original desk organizer I made for my mother is still here. And again, a lot of the leathers I use for like the tennis bag and stuff did come from that Berman leather, which was the other leather company on that street in Boston and so forth. So that's really how it started. And once I discovered leather and I made the vest and the jacket and stuff, it really inspired me. I went on to buy some of the tools. Again, I was a college student, so I couldn't buy very many at a time. So I slowly started acquiring things. And as I did that, started playing around with more designs and so forth. And it grew from there. And it still continues to grow. So again, I'll be telling more of these stories over this whole month. A lot of stories and videos and carousels of all the products I've made over the last almost 5 decades now. So again, tomorrow I'll be telling the stories about how my dad influenced my belts. On February 13th, I'll be telling stories about how my mother influenced my birds and the carvings and so forth. On February 20th, I'll be doing a live belt demo where I'm going to make a belt right here before the camera. Again, how I sit down, I just pick up a tool and I start creating a design. I mean, I'll show you what I do. But it's pretty much that. I don't have really anything in mind before I actually start most of the time. February 27th, I have a new collection of belts, limited edition collection of belts, 15 different belts designs, one of which may be the one that I make on the camera on the 20th. So that is all coming up. If you want to have access to this stuff or remember what's happening when, join my email. There's a link right below this video that you can follow, or in my bio. And that way you can have access to these things when they're happening and know about them in advance, so you can plan and so forth. And that's about it. I hope that inspired you. So how a book that cost $2 because I could afford it in college sparked my lifelong passion. I hope it will be my passion for the rest of my life, because it is something I love, and until my body gives up on me and I can't do it anymore, I will continue on. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. Have a nice day.